Okay, hi everyone. So I guess one question you might reasonably ask is, well, why should we need to change our patterns of thought? Perhaps things are going okay. What's the big issue? So I actually wanted to begin with this picture that I'm sure a lot of you will be recognizing from just last month in London. And actually, of course, this is the Extinction Rebellion, basically closing down London for a few days to raise awareness about climate breakdown. And just a show of hands, is anybody in the space here involved in Extinction Rebellion in any way? Or good on you, great, lovely to hear that we got to exactly. Really proud of all you who faced the possibility of prosecution and everything else for getting involved with this. So why were people closing down London and to talk about climate breakdown? And of course, the reason is because the ways in which our patterns of thought have led to our current civilization, for all the good things it's brought, has brought some tremendous imbalances. We're heading towards such catastrophe, and not just climate breakdown. Even if we could fix that, we've got this incredible ecological devastation we're facing. Some of you may be aware of a report that just came out from thousands of UN scientists about the ecological destruction going on. They're talking about how there may be as many as 1 million species at risk now for extinction. And then it's not just species extinction. Everywhere we look, we've got the degradation in the ocean, deforestation, an upcoming water crisis this century. Each place, we're over-consuming the earth. And then, of course, it's not just that. Look at the incredible inequalities, greatest inequalities probably in all of history, where just a handful of people own as much wealth as half the entire world's population. And then obviously to cap it all, then we have other people talking about the risk of AI taking over from humanity or whatever. So things are looking like they're out of control. And the question is, like, how did we get to that place? What happened to humanity to think in certain ways to lead us to that? And I spent a lot of my last 10 years, or even more, asking myself this question and trying to look at the underlying shapes of thinking that led us to this place. And what I got to realize in the end is that humans have a distinct way of thinking that kind of makes us unique among all other animals, is that we're driven to pattern meaning into the world. And I wrote a book, came out a couple of years ago, called The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. And what I realized as I came to this place was that patterning instinct that humans have actually is what underlies the values that a civilization develops. That basically different cultures create different sets of values, and those values shape history. And when we look at our current situation, we realize that by the same token, the values that we form as a civilization, all of us around the world, will shape our future. So to begin with, let's look a little bit more at this patterning instinct. And, we can call it an instinct because, well, even she has it. So a little infant just born, nobody tells her, you need to really listen carefully to all the sounds you get because we speak a thing called language and you should figure that out. She just hears these different sounds, feels these different feelings in association with those sounds. And because she has this instinct to pattern meaning into what goes on around her, before too long she begins to learn the language and then the culture of wherever she's born. And similarly, if we cast our minds back into the earliest part of history, the dawn of human history, well, the earliest humans, they just developed the ability to even have language. They'd look, for example, they'd look at the world around them and see something that might be random, like just the stars in the sky, but they would instantly want to put meaning into it. So every culture around the world, say, put constellations into that. They look at those kind of random patterns and they say, no, there's kind of meaning there. Here's one constellation, here's another. So we're going to look at some of those patterns of meaning that different early cultures actually put into the world around them. And we'll begin with the patterns of early hunter-gatherers. And we spent about 95% of our human history, our ancestors were nomadic hunter-gatherers, just traveling around the world in small bands. And they saw their primary pattern of meaning. They saw nature as like a giving parent. Wherever they went, there was food for them. They saw everything in nature as having spirits. They saw their own spirits as being just part of all the spirits of everything else. In fact, they saw everything as always transforming. So their own spirit might have been an animal spirit and would be again in the future. They saw no boundaries between things. And they basically saw nature as just something that was just there for them and really part of who they were. But that all changed about 12,000 years or so ago with the rise of agriculture. And I love to use this kind of image, this iconic image of a fence, as iconic in my mind for agriculture, because what agriculture was really about was the forming of separations in the human experience. You had separations between human cultivation and the sort of wildness out there in nature, but you also had separations between humans, because as people settled down and started to have their own crops, they started to develop possessions. And then the ones who got lucky or worked a little bit harder and had more crops then did better than other people, and they wanted to protect their wealth. And then they might hire other people to work on their fields and things like that. And so before too long, you had things that we take for granted just arrived with agriculture. Things like wealth, hierarchy, and just the very sense of the value of possessions as opposed to not. You also see the rise of the patriarchy with the rise of agriculture. And so along with the specialization that led to, came this like increasing strength of hierarchies, and people, rather than just being in egalitarian bands, they had to kind of say the right things to the people in charge. They had to basically ultimately pay them homage, pay them respect. So they developed a pattern of understanding the universe based on that kind of experience. So they developed a sense of a hierarchy of the gods. The nature was no longer just this giving mother and father. You had this hierarchy, and you better like sacrifice to the gods and worship them, and the development of ritual just kind of show them how wonderful you thought they were. Otherwise, they might like demolish your fields or make your life like screw up or whatever. So everywhere around the world, that kind of pattern of thought developed. In all the early civilizations, Aztec, Maya, Inca, China, India, Mesopotamia, Egypt, everywhere you see that same kind of pattern of thinking in different ways, but underlying pattern being the same. But then, about 2,500 years ago, in two parts of the world, Greece and China, different, uniquely innovative patterns of thinking occurred that really helped to shape a lot of the human experience since then. We'll begin just to spend a couple of minutes looking at what this new form of thinking was in China. So some of you may be familiar with some of these signs, the yin-yang sign in the middle. In fact, Anna probably talked about that before. And these are signs that relate to the I Ching, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And the actual translation of the I Ching is the Book of Changes, because the traditional Chinese way of looking at the cosmos was the yin-yang, everything being interconnected. They actually took that hunter-gatherer sense of things always being transforming, but they kind of systematized it. And they saw all these webs of interconnections ultimately existing in one gigantic network pattern, always changing, that they call the Tao. And so a lot of the early Chinese thinkers spent their time sort of pondering the Tao, saying, how can we sort of optimize the human existence within this world, this cosmos of this totally changing patterns? And they really kind of focused a lot on the sense of harmonizing with the Tao. And they developed this sense, this kind of new pattern of understanding the cosmos as being what we can think of as like a harmonic web of life. And the web is a great sort of metaphor for that, because imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a web there, say, connected to a tree or something. You know that just the tiniest little drop of water or just a leaf just sort of touching that web will cause a whole set of interconnected vibrations and resonance through the entire web. And that's how they saw the cosmos. What any one of us did had resonances throughout the entire cosmos, and the humans, the earth, and the heavens. So meanwhile, over a few thousand miles to the west in Greece, at around the same time, a very different pattern of thought emerged.
For podcasts, talks, debates, courses and articles, visit the Institute of Art and Ideas. Click the link on screen now to iai.tv.